Marty.
Committee Chair Balducci, you are live.
Thank you very much, Pamela. I'd like to call the Finance Committee meeting to order. Having done that, I would ask Rachel to please take attendance.
Very good. Chair Balducci,
Here,
Regent Gouet,
he is
Present.
on his way, right?
Regent Santiago. Absence is noted. Regent Stewart. Absence is noted. Regent Yang.
Here.
Welcome to our ex officio, Professor Cunningham, our institution
Here.
president, CFOs, and Chancellor Chang. Chair Balducci, we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. This is probably the most important committee meeting we have, and I'm hoping more members will be here and to take part in it. We have nine or 10 or whatever in the course of the year, and this is the one where we decide on the budget for the next fiscal year. Hopefully, with the discussion that will take place with the members that I have on this committee who are pretty good at detailing things out. We've had conversations. I've had them with two or three of them anyway so far. And I'm sure this will be great. And I know that Lloyd has prepared this in some detail for us and to make a decision as to move forward and bring this budget to the full board next week, which was something I would like to do. And I'm sure the members of the committee would like to do once their questions are answered. So with that, unless any committee members has any comments or any prior to?
Nope.
Yes, keep that. I'll turn it over to Lloyd for you to go through this number by number, so to speak, Mr. CFO.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did you not want to approve the previous meeting's minutes first?
I do. Wasn't that important right now to do that prior to this, but why don't we do that first? Thanks for that suggestion. I would make a motion that we accept the meeting, the minutes of the previous, the April meeting, right?
Or I'll make the motion, you can second. Or Marty can second.
Why don't you go ahead and do that?
Okay, so moved.
Second.
Second.
It's good. We got a couple seconds. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you. We have a second one also, don't we? Or is that it? Well, maybe I'm thinking last month's meeting we had two. Okay, with that now, Alina, very nice to have you here. Thank you. I will now turn it back over to you unless you have any other suggestions, Mr. Blanchard.
No, sir, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much. You should see my presentation on your screen.
Yes.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is the June 12th meeting of the BOR Finance and Infrastructure Committee. Every June, as the chairman mentioned earlier, we present our spending plan for the coming year to the Board of Regents for their approval. This plan, assuming that it is approved, will become effective on July 1, which is about 17 days from now. So I will go ahead and get started. This slide will start by showing the budget context. And what I want to do is set the context for this particular FY25 budget. The context starts at the beginning of the current fiscal year, FY24, when we were projecting $146 million deficit for FY25. Because of that, the board directed the administration to develop a mitigation plan to address those large deficits. And we did. We developed a $100 million mitigation plan, and it fell short by about $48 million. And so we requested of the state that $48 million. On top of the $48 million and the $100 million mitigation plan, we knew that there would be a reopener of the CBAC agreement for FY25. That reopener will cost $33 million, and the state will pay for that $33 million in the form of block grant increases and one-time funds to help pay for the non-block grant employees, including those employees who are not represented by unions. The state and the General Assembly also expanded PAC for $5.7 million. And so the $48 million, the $33 million plus the PAC is what comprises the $80 million. That you'll see the math down in the second to the last bullet, where 41.5 will be dedicated to deficits, 32.8 will be dedicated to the CBAC and other raises, and 5.7 will be dedicated to PAC. That equals $80 million. Mr. Chairman, I want to also mention that in addition to the $80 million request that we made, you advocated very strongly for an additional $20 million for tuition relief for our students. The bill, HB 5523, Section 7, included that $20 million, assuming that those funds will be made available in December. Following our conversations with our union partners and stakeholders, the Chancellor decided that this will be a priority for his administration to provide tuition relief to our students. And therefore, because of your advocacy and your championship, Mr. Chairman, and the Chancellor's leadership and support, for those reasons, the General Assembly provided those $20 million in HB 5523, Section 7. So, Mr. Chairman, first of all, I want to thank you for your leadership on this issue and your championing taking care of our students by lowering the costs, or at least mitigating the cost on our students as much as we can. Chancellor, I also want to thank you for your leadership in moving us forward to support the chairman's advocacy. And finally, I'd like to thank our union partners and our students for their advocacy at the General Assembly for this particular $20 million. This slide shows our projected results. It shows three things. One, starting in FY24, it shows where we were in terms of our deficit at the beginning of the current fiscal year. Two, it shows how we will end the current fiscal year. That shows a great deal of mitigation that led to large surpluses for the year, which three will help us balance FY24 and FY25. You'll see on the screen that there is a surplus projected by Central and a small deficit projected by CT State. That deficit will be erased by the RSA increase to the block grant. For CT State, it would easily exceed that $2.2 million. I have not included the RSA of $14 million in our budget numbers because while we have had conversations with OPM about the RSA, we do not yet know, or we do not yet have it. I believe it was announced yesterday by the Secretary of OPM.
Originally, we were looking at 18 million, right, on that, Lloyd?
We had proposed 18 million for the RSA because that amounts to the cost for our block grant employees, and 15 million for the non-block grant employees and non-represented employees. The 18 million, instead of the 18 million, they decided that they would increase our block grant by 3.6%, which adds up to $14 million. So we will use $4 million out of the ARPA allocation to pay for the remainder of the block grant cost, and then the remainder of the $32.8 million to pay for the non-represented and non-block grant employees. This slide shows that the FY25 budget is now at pre-pandemic level. You'll see on this slide that FY24 and FY25 were very much lower than the last 2 years, FY22 and certainly FY23. The spike in FY23 is an anomaly, and let me explain this anomaly. You'll see that in FY22, we spent $1.274 billion. In FY23, that number went up to $1.4 billion. Now, FY23 was an anomaly for three reasons. One, there were raises passed by CBAC that included 2 years. And then those raises, they also included lump sum increases. Bear with me while I walk you through what comprises that spike in FY23. The FY22 raise of 4.5% amounted to $31 million. It also, in FY22, the raise included lump sum raises of $2,500 for every employee. That amounts to $14 million. So the FY22 increases amounted to $45 million. In FY23, the raises were 4.5%. So that equals $32 million. There was also another lump sum of $1,000 given to employees for FY23. That amounted to $6 million. And in FY23, there was the cost of the 27th payroll. Mr. Chairman, as you know, most years there are 26 payrolls, but every 10 years or so, the calendar includes a 27th payroll. In FY23, the 27th payroll cost us $25 million. So the total increase for FY23 in salaries was $63 million. Both the FY22 increases and the FY23 increases all were paid in FY23. That amounted to $108 million in raises that were incorporated in that single year FY23. Of that $108 million, $67 million of those salary increases are permanent and continued into FY24 and will continue into FY25 and beyond. The balance of that increase were used for other operating supports. That explains the increase in this FY23 number. And the purpose of this slide is to show you that CSEU has worked hard to mitigate the remaining costs to bring our number down to a level that is consistent with FY19 and FY18. So we feel like we've done all that we can to reduce our costs. It looks like it's flat here over the last few years, but please recall that all of these bars include accumulated inflation costs, accumulated CBAC raises, and other increases. So those increases we continue to mitigate against to maintain a flat expenditure posture. You'll see on the right-hand side of this slide when annual spending grew and when it didn't grow or when it grew by a modest amount. I've highlighted in red those 3 years where there was a more than average increase. The FY14, we saw a 7% increase. In FY19, we saw a 6.8% increase in spending. And it was FY23 that I just described that amounted to a 15% increase in our spending for the reasons I just described. Last year, however, we faced a very large decrease in our spending to the tune of over $250 million. So we feel like with that kind of a drop, we are still able to maintain service levels for our students while not overspending.
Lloyd, before you go further, just in case one of the members have, I see Dr. Cunningham and Dr.
Sure.
Sasenka, Colleen is what I like
Yeah.
best. Here, and members of the committee, in case they want to interrupt, is that okay with you as we move along? So
That's perfectly fine, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to answer any questions along the way.
Thank you for that.
Professor Cunningham, did you have a question?
No, I just wanted to thank you for this information and also sort of expand on your observation that we should consider inflation and sort of what we are able to offer in real terms to our students. So I believe that if we adjusted the fiscal year 24 dollar values for inflation in real terms, we're talking about a 20% decrease in resources available to our students from the pre-pandemic levels.
I appreciate that comment, Professor Cunningham. I will show in subsequent slides when I show the 12-year trend on other expenses, I will show that it outperformed inflation. Thank you, though, for your comments.
I have a couple of questions, but I'm happy to wait until the end of the presentation.
No, is it about like if If it's like right now, why don't you do it now instead of waiting and, why don't you do that,
Well,
Colleen?
I want to at least make the observation that while I understand that getting back to pre-pandemic levels of funding might be a goal, that was a historically low funding year for us, especially relative to our enrollments, et cetera. So it might be worth taking a look at other measures of where our goals should be. I also, and I guess if you're saying as the information unfolds, can I ask also about why the number from the RSA has changed? I know that the way that I think it usually works is that we get an amount that covers the block granted employees, and you said that that number is actually 18 million. And that we are unique among state agencies because we don't have everything covered by the RSA because we're considered as having another source of revenue. That source of revenue is tuition paid by students. So this reduction with that, I mean, to me, the 3 point whatever percent seems a little arbitrary. Could you explain like what the justification for that is? And also like, what does that communicate to us about whoever makes the decisions about what comes out of the RSA? What does that communicate to us about where they think we should go with our funding and who should bear the cost of our system? Because it seems to me that that's a statement that more of our costs should be borne by tuition. I don't know if I'm interpreting that wrong, but that's what it looks like to me. And the legislature certainly gave us money to maybe go in the other direction. So I find this a strange about face.
Well, Professor Sinsanker, thank you for your comment. I think that I cannot offer rationale on behalf of another agency of the state. I can offer, though, that they would argue that they are keeping their eye on avoiding deficiency, and they believe that they are pretty close, and they are probably trying to protect the state against deficiency overall. And so usually what happens is they give agencies a haircut when they get more comfortable about where the budget will be at the end of the year. If there is enough room, they will release that haircut. If there's not enough room, they will maintain the haircut. That's really all I can say about rationale. I think what it says about the policy of the state in terms of funding higher education, the state seems to believe that the students should share in the costs of increases of fringe and of other costs that we bear on an annual basis. So whatever share the state provides and whatever share the students provide, that's not been made explicit as a policy statement, but as a budgetary statement, it really does serve as a policy statement. So I think it's a matter of shared costs between the state and the students. And the real question only is, how much should the students bear?
May I follow up with quick, it just seems to me that there's a significant difference of orientation to that question between the legislators that prioritized our budget this year, this off-budget year, when there were other places for the money to go, and whoever, and I don't know who is, making these decisions about what share of that, one-time funding needs to go towards these raises and, as it indicates into the future. So I think it's concerning to me. I don't know exactly how those decisions are made. Is there any rationale provided for the percentage of our costs that has been covered?
I would say, as an economics professor, correct me if I'm wrong, Professor Cunningham, that the benefits from higher education accrue both to the private individual and to the public. I would argue that good public policy would allow the students to pay for the benefits, to pay for costs commensurate with the benefits they receive privately, which is the increase in their salaries when they graduate, increase from if they would work only with a high school diploma, and the public benefits, to the extent that there are public benefits from higher education, that the state would subsidize the remaining costs. The research shows that there are large public benefits to higher education. And while I don't have anything in this particular presentation to show that, I do have data and research summaries on that point I'd be happy to share with anyone who is interested.
So can I just add to your question, Dr. Sasanker, that we certainly advocated for the 18 million from RSA, and again, not to speak for another agency or to kind of try to project into their rationale. We advocated for the 18 million, and we've been told that 14 million will be made available right now. We will continue to advocate for the 18 million because, to your point, and I think at the macro level as well, when there isn't sufficient funding for maintaining our baseline operations, those burdens do fall on our students, right? We fully recognize that. That is something that certainly this year and even in previous legislative sessions, we and our stakeholders and partner units who have been out there advocating vociferously and with great intention have made it very clear, right, that burden falls on our students. So we're absolutely on the same page when it comes to that being a really dire concern of ours, and we'll continue to kind of push that in our conversations. But just so that it's clear for the record that was definitely part of the presentation and the case that we made to the legislature that I think our legislators in the state did hear. But clearly there's more work to do.
Thank you, Thank you, Chancellor. I'm going to proceed. So this slide shows the total state support that we received from the state for FY25. That amounts to nearly $600 million. We are certainly grateful to the state for this level of support. However, in total, relative to FY24, it does fall short of FY24 by $36 million. You will see in FY24, we received a large amount of temporary operating support, and I'll address this issue on the next slide. It was only recently and you'll see in the biennium budget, only $48.8 million, and this $27.5 million was provided for additional support. And that's partly what led to a very large projected deficits at the beginning of FY24. Recently, at the close of session, the General Assembly generously provided an additional $80 million that brought this $48.8 million to $128.8 million. That $128.8 million is all ARPA funds, and this $27.5 billion is all carry forward funds. So I'm highlighting those two numbers because the next slide will be a drill down on those two numbers, which amount to $156 million. This is the $156 million slide showing our temporary operating support. This slide is important because this represents mostly ARPA funds, precisely $128.8 million in ARPA funds, which will soon expire. So we are preparing ourselves for the expiration of this amount of funds, and it is a big part of our mitigation plan for FY25. You'll see the first column on this chart simply sets a baseline for the current year, FY24. You'll see that for the current year, the state provided us with $202.7 million in temporary support. For FY25, I've got three separate columns in the middle there. The first column is temporary operating support. These are ARPA dollars. They were provided in the biennium budget of 48.8. The second column is more temporary operating support from carry forward funds of $27.5 million. These two columns were both in the biennium budget. Only recently did we see the additional operating support of $80 million. So altogether, these three tranches of funds provide us with $156 million in temporary operating support for FY25. And finally, you'll see in the last column, the variance. You'll see how for each institution except for Western, those numbers have gone down. The operating support has gone down. Clearly, with Western Connecticut State University and CT State Community College, they had bigger deficits that we wanted to help them close. And you will see throughout this presentation that we do just that.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
Can I just ask, when you say ARPA funds will soon expire, when do they expire?
Well, apparently they were designed to expire in FY25, but apparently there was a change to allow them to extend into FY26. But
Okay.
I've got to confirm the precise date on that, Professor Sasanker.
I believe it's the end of the calendar year 26.
Okay, thank you for that. So we will continue to implement our FY25 mitigation plan to prepare for this particular transition. And the choices that we made to allocate the $80 million in addition to the 48.8 and the 27.5 were all intended to provide the institutions with the resources they need to manage that transition. This is how we will propose to allocate the $80 million. It will cover the projected deficits, the CBAC raises, and the CBAC raises include non-represented employees and PACT funding. So with this, Mr. Chairman, I want to take a step back and help people understand why our spending has grown the way it has grown. A lot of commentary on CSU spending has focused on overspending, out of control spending. I want to help dispel that notion with these next few slides. From FY12 to FY23, personnel expenditures grew by $431 million. Now, FY23 is the spike there of the orange part of this chart. That just shows that fringe expenses went from $215 million in FY12. It doubled, more than doubled by FY23 to $483 million. That decline, that sharp decline, represents the fringe policy change. I'll describe more of that later. You'll see the gray bar, the gray section or the gray area of the chart. This is starts with base salaries in FY12, which were $533 million. In order to accommodate the increased cost of fringe and the increased cost of the wage increases, whether they were CBAC increases or otherwise, we had to reduce the number of personnel that we employ in order to accommodate these extraordinarily increasing costs. So you will see salaries in terms of the people that we hire went down $125 million from 533 in FY12 to 403 that we propose in FY25. All CBAC and other wage increases total $283 million. And that green slice shows how those wage increases accumulate. Now, I am not putting this out there to denigrate our union partners. I simply want to decompose the salary expenses into those expenses that we can control from those expenses that really we cannot control. The state negotiates these wage increases with CBAC, and those costs amounted to $283 million for FY25. The remainder of our costs in FY25, personnel costs, is $175 million, which is the new sort of fringe costs that we face after the fringe policy change. The fringe policy change did indeed shift $300 million from CSCU to the state comptroller. But in a later slide, I will show you that by removing those costs, the state also removed more of the state support than it removed in fringe costs. And that partly is why we faced an increase in costs because of that policy change. So before that policy change, personnel costs comprised 80% of all spending. That is extraordinary. After the policy change in FY24, that percentage is at 70%. That's the impact of the fringe policy change, but I'll show you how it did not help us as it relates to the support we receive for fringe relative to the costs that fringe imposes. This slide shows that it was not the personnel hiring that led to those increases in costs, because we have decreased our personnel counts by almost 3,000 employees just since FY19. So our employee count went down in the past few years alone by 17%. The idea that we are not resetting our expenditure base in the face of declining enrollments and other challenges is simply false. We are resetting our expenditure base to commiserate with the decline of enrollments, but most of the reason why we are we're reducing our employee count is because of the extraordinary costs that we face in fringe and in raises.
So
Of those 3,000 employees that lost their jobs, more than 1,800 of them were part-time faculty, were adjunct faculty, and another almost 1,200 were part-time staff. I think I heard someone had a question.
yeah, so a couple things here, right? So that what you just referred to happened in fiscal year 21, as per this chart, right? Correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now the up above, I'm just trying to understand like some of these data that you just came through, right? Because you basically said the base salaries, right, down 125 million from 533 to 408. Right, and that's over this kind of FY12, which is a very long time ago, right? But still, I'm trying to understand how it seems like the headcount has stayed pretty flat, even over last year when we were making our heroic measures to cut, right? In terms of overall costs, and yet the base salary still went down. Like, rationalize this for me. I don't understand, because I don't see a significant loss of heads between FY23 and 24.
I'll try to answer that for you, Regent Yang. If you look at the gray and the green area, that represents personnel costs minus fringe.
Mhm.
So yes, salary costs have gone up.
Mhm.
You can do the math. 283 plus 403 is 683. That's relative to 533 over a 12-year period. Seems perfectly reasonable that salaries would go up, but they are not going up at the rate at which people think. It is the fringe costs that are imposing cost increases on CSCU. And only in the last year did that change.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
No, it's not really much of a question. I'm just trying to understand exactly what is happening here, what's going on in this chart.
So what this shows is that we have to let go of those people just to accommodate increased costs. And that includes raises.
I understand, but the actual FY23, and this is an FY24 projected finish, right? Because it closed June 30. The doesn't show a significant change in headcount, right? 14,603 to 14,589.
In the last year, no, it doesn't.
Okay, fine.
Lloyd, it's
But
Mark.
let me say this, what is not shown here, and I don't have the FY25 personnel count because we're not there yet, but from, there are declines in the personnel. Most of those declines took place in FY20 and 21. Decreasing our employee base even more simply will hurt students.
Marty has a question to Lloyd.
Lloyd, thank you. Is not the fringe becoming more potent in a negative way for us since we're reducing part-timers? And the part-time fringe cost is much lower than the full-time fringe cost?
That is true, Regent Guay. Yes, that is true.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually an amplified issue, right? Because we don't get the commensurate
So what would happen as we reduce our part-time employees, fringe costs become a greater share of the expenditures.
Yeah, it's almost like when you reduce a full-timer, I mean, this is the same in any organization. Reducing a full-timer will reduce your salary expense and your fringe commensurately, but if you reduce a part-timer, it only reduces the salary and
That's
really
correct.
doesn't.
Right.
Your
Yeah,
fringe.
exactly.
That's correct. You don't create fringe savings by letting go of your part-time employees.
Exactly.
Right.
So while we're reducing employees, my argument is it is not the personnel counts, it is not our hiring that increases costs.
As of now.
Finally, excuse me, sorry, Mr. Regent Yang,
I mean, as of now, right? You're telling a story up till this moment, which is true. I agree.
that's all I have to offer you, yes. So finally, the other potential explanation for increasing costs is our non-personnel expenditures. Remember, non-personnel expenditures before the fringe policy change was a mere 20% of our budget. Now it's closer to 30% of our budget. You'll see that non-personnel expenditures grew by $98 million over the 12-year period shown on the screen. This averages 3.1% per year. Now, the larger increases are since the pandemic. Why? Because inflation has been far larger since the pandemic than before the pandemic. Before the pandemic, we were increasing non-personnel expenditures something closer to 2.2%. That was even below the low levels of inflation before the pandemic. After the pandemic, certainly these other expenses grew, but they grew by less than the extraordinary level. They grew because of the extraordinary levels of inflation that we saw since the pandemic. I think the data bears that out, regardless of source of that data. Now, you'll see in particular, other expenses, which is the orange bar, grew by $31 million over that 12-year period from $175 million in FY12 to $365 million. I think I didn't replace that number. So that 206 should be 365. Oh, I'm sorry, just 206. I'm right. 365 is the total amount. Financial aid increased $30 million from 50 million in FY12 to 80 million in FY25. That is almost exactly 5% increase, which represents every time we raise tuition, we raise financial aid. So it tends to go up together with tuition. Utilities went up by only a couple of million when we started paying for those, went from 31 million in FY18 to 33 in FY25. Debt service went down $3 million from $36 million in FY12 to $33 million in FY25. And finally, waivers. Waivers are tuition waivers awarded by statute to folks like police, fire, veterans, and of course, employees in higher education have the right to receive waivers if they choose to take classes. So waivers went up by $7 million. It was a $6 million expenditure in FY12. It is now $13 million expenditure.
Lloyd, before you go further, and you and I did this yesterday, but for my edification, the words OE and miscellaneous always drive me crazy because they always make up a certain part of whatever we're talking about. Just quickly run by the OE or other expenses so the members are totally aware of what our conversation had to do with yesterday.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. OE is a budget language for other expenses, and it represents everything else, all of the little things and big things that we buy, pencils, papers, printers, computers, and the like. Computers are a very big part of this expense.
That was the key that I think you made yesterday, that's the largest piece of this.
Absolutely.
That's correct?
Absolutely. But it's all of the little things, right? So, and they add up across 6 institutions and 17 campuses.
Mhm.
Dr. Richard, may I ask a quick question?
Yes, please do. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. If we go back to your headcount slide, and focus just on the full-time headcount,
Sure.
you'll notice that the staff full-time headcount has actually increased while the full-time faculty has decreased. And in the educational enterprise, of course, the faculty are the closest to that educational mission. Can you possibly explain why the staff to faculty ratio has actually increased from 1.47 in 19 to 1.67 in 24? Why is our headcount growing at a distance from the students when we're shrinking overall?
Well, I can't say particularly where the source of those increases are, Professor Cunningham. I can tell you that at the system office, in the last year, we have reduced our personnel counts by 30 personnel. So the institutions are in the best place to determine their needs, whether they are teaching needs or non-teaching needs, and they govern themselves accordingly. So I really can't point particularly to which institution, but I'm happy to share the data with you offline.
May I ask a follow-up?
So
Sorry.
can I just say real quick to Brendan's point? I mean, you know, just broadly speaking, and we have several of our presidents here, and I think our presidents should feel at liberty to speak to some of this if they feel so compelled. But, you know, we know that there are very particular needs that our students have, obviously in the classroom, first and foremost, right? We have to have our faculty there. And as we've gone through this very rigorous, painful past year where we have had to non-reappoint many part-time faculty and staff, we know that that has had an impact. You know, broadly speaking, I believe that there has been a trend in higher education in general where we have seen significant additional needs in the mental health space, in career counseling, in advising, and again, in many frontline student-facing areas. And I know that in speaking with our presidents, obviously trying to maintain our teaching capacity at an appropriate level is key. But there are also many student service and student-facing areas that we have seen burgeoning needs and requirements in as well. So again, with some broad strokes, it's not all in one particular area. I think it's spread across, and we obviously, you know, we let our presidents make those decisions by campus and by institution to ascertain what the needs of the students are and where they will apply some of those resources. But I don't know if any of our presidents feel compelled to kind of chime in real quick on this, since it's a topic that is germane to the operations of their institutions.
I think we'll find some questions as we move along with this.
Sure. Well, I can also say, and this is one perspective, my perspective, if you look at the part-time staff reduction, it amounts to about 1,102 personnel. Those people were doing some work that had to be taken on by someone. So an increase of 133 full-time staff, I think, is a decent trade-off when you reduce your part-time staff by 1,100. So it's a 1 to 10 trade-off kind of thing, right? For every 10 part-time personnel, you might want to increase your full-time by 1 just to take on the work across the board. Now, my perspective is only across the board. So that's one explanation I can offer that might hold water campus by campus.
Alina?
Thanks. Can I just, because you made reference to the reductions with the system office / shared services line, I noticed that, I forget the number, it's about 30 folks came out of shared services. Only one actually came out of system office. And shared services, while it has been under the control of system office, is actually primarily serving the community college. So I wasn't sure how to understand that. Are those lines that are now being transferred to CT State? Is that a reduction in services to CT State? Or just how is that to be understood?
So of those 30 persons that reductions in system office and shared services, about 12 or 13 of those were transfers from shared service control, so to speak, to CT state control. That's a transfer that we made an agreement with President Maduko on so that they can improve their HR services on their respective campuses. This consolidation really brought a lot of CT State's capacity to the system office within the shared services unit. We want to strike a more hybrid stance whereby where there are high touch needs at the campuses, we want to be able to move some of those folks back to the campuses. Where there are needs at the headquarters of CT State, we want to be able to support that need as well. Where there are efficiencies from scale to be gained, we want to maintain those personnel within a shared services unit so that they could be leveraged across the entire system.
And of those 30 personnel, the ones got transferred, the others are either A, retired, or have literally been let go to find other positions elsewhere.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
So shared services has been reduced by 17 people that we don't plan to be restored.
Yeah, it's 17 or 18, yeah.
How
That's
many
correct.
of those reductions were managerial or like manager level?
Excuse me, was there a question?
How many of the reductions in the shared services / system office line were like at managerial level?
I do not know the answer to that question at the moment, but I can get it for you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Lloyd.
Thank you. So I've already shown this slide. So the whole point of those slides was to show that whatever increases in costs people are seeing in CSCU, those costs are coming from really two sources: fringe costs and increased salary costs, which are negotiated by the state. So what we can control, we do control. What we can control, we control so that we can accommodate and absorb these extraordinarily increased costs from those previous two sources. One final source of increased costs comes from the fringe policy change. You'll recall in FY23, which is shown here on the slide, we received $396 million from the state to support $445 million in fringe costs. Yes, those costs are extraordinarily high. And that's just the share that we bore. The state still bore other parts of this cost. So the students in FY23 covered $48 million of fringe costs. This fringe swap led to the following things. The revenues went down by $354 million, and the costs went down by $270 million. So in taking away the fringe support, they left us with more fringe expenses, meaning they took more support than they took expenses back. That led to an increase in costs that the students bear. That's why if you look from 23 to 24, our revenues are now $42 million. And by revenues, I mean revenues dedicated to covering fringe costs. The state increased our block grant by $42 million last year, or the beginning of this year, for that purpose. But it increased our fringe costs, it increased the share of fringe costs paid for by the students. That's the $117 million in the current fiscal year. And in FY25, the students will pay for $133 million of the $175 million in fringe costs, while the state pays for 42 and the retirement costs. So this fringe swap was not helpful to us, despite the fact that we sought relief from these extraordinary costs. These costs imposed a $69 million increase in the current year, and they will impose another $16 million in the next year. So the 16 is this 69 plus 16 is what leads to the $85 million shown on the screen. This was why we were complaining about that particular policy change. It just added costs. It didn't subtract costs from us. It subtracted costs from the state. So this final slide, before I begin to show you the spending plan, is an attempt to show you how, despite the strong mitigation efforts all of our institutions undertook, and a mitigation effort that totals $94 million, we're always faced with added costs before we make our own decisions about hiring or about investments or anything else. So if you look at the last three columns, the $32.8 million in CBAC costs, the inflationary costs on OE of about $17 million, and the $15.8 million of the additional fringe costs I just showed you, that's $66 million, wiping away $66 million of the $94 million mitigation we undertook. A level of mitigation that exceeds the sum of what we had planned for both FY24 and FY25. We outperformed our mitigation plan. The problem is $66 million in costs get imposed on us without taking another step. So this is one of the challenges that I want regents to understand. We mitigate costs, costs increase for reasons beyond our control. We mitigate costs, costs increase for reasons beyond our control. That happens every single year. Now, we don't reduce our costs by $94 million every single year, but as I showed you in that slide earlier, we have to reduce our costs just to absorb the additional costs that are beyond our control. So with that, I'd like to present to you our FY25 spending plan, which totals $1.2 billion for FY25. You'll see at the expenditure line in FY24, we started the fiscal year with 1.205 spending plan. That spending plan included deficits for a number of our institutions. And it was for that reason that the board asked us to produce a mitigation plan. It is the mitigation plan and the efforts we took on that plan that reduced our expenditures to the FY24 estimate of $1.163 million. Now we're proposing a level of expenditure, 1.216, that is virtually the same as at the beginning of the fiscal year, but the increase amounts to $52 million. Of that $52 million increase, you'll see that 16 of it comes from fringe. You'll see 5.7 of it comes from financial aid and institutional waivers. You'll see that 6.2 million of it comes from other expenses, utilities and debt service, and $50 million in salaries. Now, the $33 million in CBAC increases is within that $50 million. So the increase that you're seeing here is quite a modest increase. It is actually 1% over FY24 budget year over year, and a mere 3.5% increase over the estimated amount post mitigation. Now I will show you how this spending plan breaks down institution by institution.
So one second, before we go there, what's the negative 25.5?
That's just adjustments and transfers that were reduced. You'll see how there were transfers of 21.7 million under FY24 estimate. It basically is the sum of 21.7 and a negative 3.7. Negative 3.7 is just, this is just the net effect of transfers across the system.
I'm sorry, I don't understand that. Why is that a negative 25.5 in the 25 versus the fiscal 20, the budget prior?
Valentina?
Why the massive delta? You're talking about this is a transfer between years?
These are net effective transfers. This is a delta between the FY24 estimate and what we are proposing. Valentina, are you in the room or on the call?
Yes, I am Valentina Pustai. I would like you to look at page from 36 on the agenda package that has all the details by institution. It's obviously, it's a large number of details that need to be analyzed. And because it requires more time, all the details are presented by institutions, and you will find the variation from covering the cost at the system office or setting up aside funds for future commitments and requirements.
Right. So it is a transfer between years, basically.
Yeah, so that's kind of the delta between the prior year, like couldn't guesstimate, but you can
I
see
understand
on
that.
the-
I appreciate the fact that there are detailed information, which we did not have sufficient time to review. So I hear you. That's why I asked the
Yes.
question. So,
Would be more than happy to provide all the details that you would like behind every single number.
I understand. It's just, it's a huge number on this page, right? Minus 117%. So I'm trying to understand what that's about.
It's smoothing, right?
Yeah, it's smoothing.
Seasonal
Well,
adjustment.
So,
Right.
so let's be clear, part of what we do is collapse all of the spending categories to put on a single slide so that you can see the more general picture. Clearly, there are transfers, set-aside funds, and other commitments that are subsumed within that one line. We will break that out for you later today and share it with members of the committee.
Does the spending plan include the 14 million we expect from the RSA? And does it include the amount that was set aside for what should have been the retirement incentive that really wasn't utilized the way it was expected?
Those numbers are not in this spending plan. No, Professor.
Will you be talking about how they might be used?
So the RSA will add to our block grant. It is not shown here yet because we hadn't gotten confirmation of that until just yesterday. So that $14 million will increase that 411 million by 14 mil to 428 or 6. I'm not doing the math right. But the numbers, the dollars that we had set aside for the retirement incentive were held back from FY24, the $13.5 million. I can show it to you. It's in this. It's basically held at system office. It's $13.5 million. We will use some of it for the retirement incentive, but not nearly as much as we had expected.
Mm-hmm.
Will the board have a chance to discuss, because I mean, the money from the RSA frees up 14 million of the one-time funds that, again, we got prioritized this session in an off-budget year. So there are lots of other state agencies that could have gotten this money. It went to us for specific purposes. Are we going to have any opportunity to discuss how it will be used to kind of honor that intention?
Yeah, I'll answer that, Lloyd. So, I mean, the short story is, there's still a lot of moving pieces to this, right? And so that funding, which as of right now, we're still waiting for some of the retirement incentive details to settle as we finish up that process, because there are individuals that did take advantage of that. So we need to process all of that out and see how that kind of has an external impact. And then obviously we're looking at the funding now, since this is ARPA and it is capable of being extended into FY26. There are a lot of things that we want to continue to keep centered, right? We mentioned earlier at the very beginning of the presentation, if the ARPA funding that is in the ARPA bill, that $20 million comes through, we have every hope and intention to utilize that for some type of tuition relief for our students, right? This funding as well, obviously, the funding that we received is still, this is still, we're not out of the woods, right? We're still in a pretty tight, hard situation. And so we have to be very mindful of all the different sources of funding and see what is needed to continue our operations to make sure that things are, performing at an appropriate and effective level, while we're also keeping an eye out for the future, right? And what may be able to be carried over and so on. So obviously more discussion to be had. Clearly a lot going on at the administrative level, talking with our presidents, all of our CFOs, with the board. And so a long-winded way of saying much more to be discussed, both kind of in our day-to-day, but also in more kind of public venues.
Yeah, so can I,
Go ahead, Ted.
well, that's on a different point though. You okay? Okay. So, thank you for that, Chancellor, because that's a perfect segue to, I really just wanted to just bring up something, a couple things, right? So one is, I get it. I think we all understand how hard fringe hurts us, right? And, I think, it's certainly an external force. I take your point, Lloyd, but it is an intended external force, right? Like that they are blowing that wind against us on purpose, okay? And telling us to cut, right? Now, maybe they're being a little bit, disingenuous or maybe not as direct in certain conversations of it, but the impact of it is clear that it results in having to cut staff in order to stay flat, right? So that I appreciate the fact that it's external, but it is still our reality, right? So I just want to bring up a point which got made by the chancellor, which I completely agree with and I discussed with other people on this committee before this meeting, which is that we are not out of the woods. We accomplished a lot, okay, in a very short period of time after the board passed the desire for mitigation. And kudos to everybody, all the presidents and everyone here for doing that work. The legislature and the governor's office came back with additional funds. Fantastic. That's a one-time thing, thanks to ARPA money that is disappearing next year. My personal expectation, I think everyone's expectation should be, especially in light of what we just talked about in terms of fringe, that our support per student is going to go down, okay, in our FY26, right? FY25 is what we're talking about here, right? And so, not out of the woods to me means we need to still have extreme fiscal discipline in the FY25 budget that we are considering right now, so that we can anticipate what's going to happen in the next biennial, which again, based on everything I just said, and I think we should at least plan for the expectation. If it turns out the other way around, they start changing the spending cap, all sorts of wonderful things can happen. That would be great. But for us, I think to proceed with any other assumption other than reduced per student funding would be reckless. And I would go further, which is to say that the reason behind that is that the major headwinds that are blowing against our system and all higher ed in the country, at least, are the same, i.e. the demographic cliff still exists. The desire for a college degree based upon cost reduced by parents and people who question the value of that credential. And the need for those credentials, even in our own state, for state jobs that was just passed, right? And employers, large employers, some of whom, are people in this room are part of, understand no longer requiring college degrees. We are under significant pressure. And so therefore, when I look at this spending report, and I just want to bring up a point again that I made, in passing. So I'll be very clear that I don't think we were given sufficient time to review this, okay? Because the amount of detail here is massive. And without looking at the details, and I thank you, Lloyd, for your summary and, prior discussions with us, and other individual members of this committee to try to bridge this gap, in 3 days or 2.5 days, right? Or 2 days, frankly, right? It's a Herculean task, but still provides not enough information, frankly, to me to truly understand the tough trade-off we have to make, which is this. Do we need to reduce further costs, not stay flat, but reduce further costs so that we do not find ourselves back in the same boat or worse in a situation where we're expanding costs? I get you're about to say that's because of CBAC, it's because of fringe. I got it. But still, that we are expanding costs so that we then have to cut harder in 26, that basically are whiplashing ourselves back and forth, right? I would think that would be disastrous for us to have to worry about that. I want to avoid that under any circumstances. I've not been able to fully analyze that, but I do think that you know, what we're looking at here, as you just said, is a flat projection to 24, which in and of itself, I agree, is a return to prior spending levels. But is it even sufficient based upon headwinds that are blowing against us? And again, what seems very likely to me, projected reduced further funding in FY 29 from the state.
You know, part of that, and I agree with much of what you said, you and I have chatted about that, Ted. But one of the things is kicking a can down the road, which has been done in the past. We stopped that can, okay? I think we really made an effort to
This
stop
last
it.
year, yes.
And we're going to have to continue to look at this. I think we pass this budget out, we get it moved. But as we move through July, August, September, if we need to make adjustments, we're gonna have to make adjustments. It's not something we've done before. We kind of ho-hummed and we'll figure a way around it. We may have to make some major adjustments as we move into the fall, which I am not opposed to, but I know has not really been done before. Okay, that's part of my thoughts in what we're doing. I think Lloyd's doing a great job explaining this. We have some questions. I think we have some good questions from people that are sitting here, including you, you know, and Marty, et cetera, and those, Brendan and Colleen. But those questions, I think we're getting answers for. Hopefully we keep in mind, at least in my mind anyway, as we go into the fall session, if we have to make an adjustment of 50 million or 10 million or $1.380, we can do it, okay? And we haven't done it before. And that's where I am as chairman of this committee, and I'm hoping the rest of the members understand that. We have to make changes if it's necessary, not ho-hum and let's Band-Aid it.
Yeah, and I thank you for that, because I agree totally with what you're saying. And Ted, thanks for the thoughtful setup. From my perspective, this is a really hard Rubik's Cube. It's a calculus. And I think we need to do a few things. One is we need to put a budget in place now, but we almost have to start working the budget month by month, quarter by quarter. And I think we need a strategy in parallel. And I don't have this strategy, but this fringe is such a sword over our necks year after year. We may have a parallel strategy to go through the powers that be and say, look, this is what we, you know, this is not tenable. We cannot continue to have this thing hanging out because it's not fair. And I think we have to have a strategy in parallel. So we have a strategy to stay close and real time make adjustments, and a parallel strategy. And this has to be well thought out because we have to talk to a lot of fancy people in different places. But I think we have to do that. We have to do that because if not, I mean, this is gonna be a death by 1,000 cuts, and this movie is coming back to the theater next year. Same movie, right?
One quick point on all of that goes to Ted's comment, 2 or 3 days to look at this. It's not his fault. What happens is the way the legislature does business. I'm not blaming them, I've been there. Okay? But
You got nothing to say.
but if we were able to do this budgeting in January and everybody knew the numbers, Lloyd's waiting for numbers that he got yesterday, and there may be some other changes coming down the line. You know, it's really a difficult thing, and it doesn't happen that way. So it ends up, the legislature gets it done in May. Wait till next year when they get it done in June, and you have to make an adjustment between June 6th or 7th and the end of the month.
Right.
It's crazy. It's great, but it's the way the system is. So I understand where you're coming from, but it's a difficult job for Lloyd and for Melantina and for all of those folks involved with trying to put this budget
Yeah,
together.
just so we're clear, my comments are not aimed against.
No, I understand
anyone
that.
here. I understand we're kind of blowing in the wind of this, but it still results in the same result, which is that, you know, we're being asked to look to approve a year budget when we don't just barely getting the data, right? And so what you're saying is that, can we confirm that, Chancellor or Lloyd, that can we actually go walk this through month by month, quarter by quarter? Or are we basically committing? I mean, I know last year we didn't do that,
Right.
but that seemed to me extraordinary. So do we really have the ability basically to parcel out the money on a slow, like a monthly basis or something like that, and really come into that? Because that makes me feel better about moving this ahead. Because if you're telling me we lock this thing in unless it's extraordinary, then that's not something I'm for. But if we're saying, hey, we have to do what we have to do, so July 1st we can pay people, but then we're gonna come and reopen this thing basically right away, that changes things. By the way, I don't want to forget Kalina's comment regarding administrative versus faculty, right? Because that's something I want, we don't have the time to dig in now. And I don't feel good about approving this without digging in on that, right? But on the other hand, I want to hold this up because I don't have that information. Like, this is a bad trade,
We
folks.
need to work closer with faculty and all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
In the system office,
Yeah.
because I don't feel we have enough around the table. And everyone's got to give and everyone's got to get, right? People get.
No, obviously, it's not, I don't think she's saying for sure this is bad or this is good, but it's a question, it's a question, exactly.
It's a legitimate question, if I may chime in just real quick and say that first and foremost, to Chair Balducci's point, I do believe it falls under the aegis of the Finance Committee and the Board of Regents to, basically dig in and ask us, the administration and all of our institutional leaders, to provide the kind of information and data for decision-making that keeps our institutions and organization on a steady path, right? We have to find a steady, viable, sustainable path and get out of this kind of doom.
Yes.
We have to work
Institution by
towards,
institution.
we have to work towards sustainability, viability, and get out of this doom loop that we're in. And so I don't think there's anything that precludes us from having that kind of examination and ultimately, if need be, based on as recent data as possible, to make certain decisions to course correct if we do not feel that we are on the right pathway.
And you don't do it for nickels and dimes, but it's gotta be.
That's right.
You can't do nickels and dimes, but if it's something that comes up that's, critical, we say, look, we passed this X in the budget, but we're somehow 15 or $20 million short. We've got to figure a way around it, and let's do that now. Let's not kick the can back down the road as been done before.
Can I just engage? Oh, so go ahead, please.
May I suggest something?
Mm.
Because no additional information on revenues which come from tuition and fees will be really available until early September.
Early October is probably when we get it.
September, when we have the enrollment freeze.
Right. That's a big deal.
I would suggest, in the wisdom is in the room, some around the table and beyond, but I think we have an opportunity to implement some cadences and rhythms that will give us more perspectives. And those could be, at the end of August or September, what are the enrollments? What are the tuitions? And then in November, what are our run rates? And what does it look like for January? So we have these fence posts and we come up with them. They flash green, yellow, or red, and they trigger kind of an if-then moment. If you were here at Eastern and you thought you'd be here, well, then you got to go off and do something. Everyone else doesn't, but that straightens that out quickly. And you're spot on, Chair Balducci. We don't want to go after nickels and dimes. We want to really solve for the big picture, but we can't wait 12 months to go looking for.
Exactly. Yeah.
We got to spend our quarters managing our money.
Absolutely.
Right? Absolutely.
May I?
Colina?
Thanks. No, I appreciate this conversation about constant revision, but I do want to go back a little bit and engage the sort of framing that you offered, Regent Yang, on what's being communicated here, because I agree with you completely. There are lots of external pressures, whether it's the change in how much the RSA is funding or the change in the fringe that punishes us, that communicates very clearly where some people want our system to go. So I understand the pessimism on that front, but I think we should also take into consideration what actually happened this year with the legislature, with the budget, because it was highly unusual. They didn't open up the budget so they can find ARPA money. That's unusual. They took that ARPA money and threw it largely at us. Next year is another budget year. They could have waited and given us money then. They gave it to us now. Right? So I understand the projections, et cetera. We also have to keep in mind that our largest student body in the state actually is a non-traditional student body. So a lot of the projections that suggest, and we have an evolving sort of workforce with the insertion of AI. There are going to be lots of people changing up how they do what they do. So there are ways to be very optimistic about where our enrollments can go if we are creative. We have all kinds of dual enrollment things going on at CT State now, et cetera. What I think has to be the presumption of the people who continue to push back on us to squeeze our budget to shift costs on it too much onto students. There is a balance, but it's getting really burdensome. The assumption is that we can do it, like we can survive, we can get by, and we have to better communicate that we cannot. The death spiral that we are going to go into if we continue to not support the students that we get is as we shift the burden onto tuition is alarming, right? And if you consider also that the 30 people that we're celebrating that came out of system office, those are 17 of them once served CT State. And what I'm hearing is they will not be replaced, right? Or at least they're no longer on the books. That is, and we've heard the stories, we've had reports on the level of service of shared service. It's catastrophic in some places. We need help in IT. We need help in certain places. So we are breaking things beyond the point of repair. And I would prefer, as we move into this year, that we honor the intentions, this sort of very weirdly optimistic intentions, it seems, of how the legislature bet on us this year, as opposed to the pessimism coming out of what I believe is whether it's OPM, the governor's office, and squeezing us because we can't. I am on the ground. I am telling you, we cannot continue like this, and we have to demonstrate it. Use the money to have something viable, or else there'll be nothing viable to save in the next budget year, I believe. So that's the suggestion. I mean, I hear you. I see the exact same thing, but there's too much to lose.
If I may, Chair, just real quick, and I know we want to keep moving forward. I mean, I completely agree with Dr. Sasanker in this being, it was an unusual session for sure. I will say that I'm grateful for what I viewed as a level of creativity to solve on a short-term basis what I believe we all collectively were able to explicate as a deeply concerning and potentially catastrophic scenario where if we did not get that funding, gosh, I can't even imagine the conversation we'd be having right now. And so the fact that the legislature and the governor's office and the state went through what they went through, and they did end up allocating for this year, and Vice Chancellor Joseph can correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to say for every dollar that was allocated through this ARPA bill, we received approximately 23 cents per dollar that was allocated. Is that right, Adam?
We'll call it 22 and a quarter cents.
Okay, 22 and a quarter, right?
So we could use that 3 cents.
But if you think about that as percentage of the allocation for this year through the ARPA bill, that shows that they didn't just listen to us, they heard us, and they worked creatively and collectively to get us that funding. And I'm very appreciative of not just the advocacy efforts, but of the legislature. That said, also to Dr. Sasanker's point, though, the time is now to, and you've heard me say this before, so tolerate me saying it again, to really unify around finding solutions together to chart that collective creative path forward. And this is where we really rely on the faculty and the staff leaders, those who are on the ground, who understand the needs of the students, and through shared governance, create new mechanisms, new paradigms that can continue to serve those students, continue the advocacy efforts, continue to make sure that folks don't fall through the cracks, but also continue to ensure that we are demonstrating the value and providing the right level of effective partnership in doing what the state needs us to do. Right? Because if the state is one of our two sources of revenue, we must constantly substantiate and corroborate our value and deserving of that tax levy dollar. But that comes from the heart and soul of the institutions. That's the faculty and the staff that we rely on and depend on to be innovative, to have the ingenuity, and to ultimately create those new mechanisms and paradigms to deliver. And then we as an administration and as a system, we have to be there to make sure we're with you and supporting you in all of that work, right? So it is a symbiotic relationship. A lot of words. I think my point is we are in this together, but we need the faculty and staff to really, just continue to charge forward and lead in developing and creating those solutions and developing that vision as we continue to, as the board exercises its fiduciary duty through analysis, through us presenting the data, making the big decisions, and making sure that we stay on the right path. All right, Chair Balducci.
Lloyd, why don't you continue? I thought this conversation was gonna be at the end. We're having it in the middle.
I think it's a perfect conversation to have and
By
certainly
the time we
appropriate.
finish,
Such a good presentation. You've spurred all of us into energy.
go right
Well,
ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Chancellor, I'm glad we are having this conversation because this is what we should be talking about. These are challenging times and we have to reconcile a lot of moving pieces. But let me remind the regents, FY25 is not upon us yet. We still have a $48.7 million plan for FY25 to execute. So the plan, Mr. Regent Guay, is in place as in terms of the strategy. I think we can certainly develop a reporting structure that allows us to demonstrate the cadence and rhythm of our spending using things like run rates and the like. We can certainly do that on a quarterly basis. The way we receive revenues is suggested by President Toro. We get revenues 2 times a year, notwithstanding the state support, and we spend pretty much every 2 weeks through our payroll because personnel represents the vast majority of our spending. So controlling costs really is about controlling the number of personnel that we employ. And so that conversation is a conversation we have together with our union partners.
Yeah, but I just want to add, Lloyd, real quick, and I promise I'll stop talking for at least 2 minutes. I think it's also about constantly making sure that the board and all of us across the organization who have to make these decisions are getting the revenue projections in good time to make those decisions, right? So like you said, if the large majority of costs are fixed, we can predict around that. But what seems to me to be a striking variable at times is the revenue and when that will come in or maybe does not come in. And I think that has been where, to be very blunt, we as a system have fallen short. Certain campuses and certain institutions have put out projection numbers or have worked around numbers that ultimately never came to fruition and have ultimately put us in very precarious situations. And we have to be very honest and sober about how we approach that as we move forward. And I think that's something that the board can utilize as they ultimately are the fiduciary for the system.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly how we got into some of this mess, right, with some of our institutions. And we just need to be clear, if we're going to commit to doing this, that we don't end up going, well, that was just 1 month, let's just see what happens the next month, right? Because that's how you fall into this mess.
And I think it's an opportunity to build a muscle we don't have everywhere. And, forecasting projections, we'll see who's good, who's not, but we got to get everyone up and we just need, the longer we can see out, the more we can plan and be predictable and manage. At the end of the year, and as you have a gap and you got to vote an increase or two, this is.
But also Regent Guay, to be accountable, right? I mean, I have to be accountable. If I'm the leader of the organization and my presidents are the leaders of their campuses, we have to be accountable for the numbers that we make public. And because we have to be accountable to you, we have to be accountable to the state.
Right.
Thank you, Lloyd.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this point, I'll walk through the parts of the spending plan for each institution, starting with Central Connecticut State. They are proposing $232 million spending plan, which will produce a $6.1 million surplus. You'll see in the variance section that amounts to a 5% increase from the FY24 estimate. You'll see state appropriations are up modestly. One-time funding is down significantly. Tuition and fees is up. and housing and dining services essentially remain flat. As it relates to expenditures, expenditures are up, consistent with inflation and with the CBAC increases. The next institution is Eastern Connecticut State University, who proposes a spending plan of $125 million. And that with that plan, they are projecting a balanced budget. That spending plan represents a 4% increase in expenditures. And their state appropriations has basically been flat. Similar to the story with Central, they face a decrease in one-time funding that's fairly substantial, but they did some extra work to increase their tuition or increase their enrollments. And on the spending side, they are increasing their personnel costs commensurate with CBAC wage increases. And all other costs are increasing below inflation. Next institution is Southern Connecticut State University with a spending proposal of $232 million. And Southern projects a balanced budget in FY25. That $232 million spending plan represents a 7% increase, and it breaks down accordingly. 6% increase in their personnel costs, which is just 1% greater than the CBAC increases. Increases in fringe benefit costs. You may be surprised that this fringe benefit cost increase is larger than other institutions. It basically is a story about the breakdown of employees they have relative to other institutions. For example, we believe, have the older employees or a greater share of older employees who have fringe benefit packages that are more expensive than those that are now allowed.
Why are there other expenses 4%?
Other expenditures is increasing $4 million,
7%.
which is 7%.
Yeah, I meant the $4 million.
So current inflation, other expenses face current inflation. Current inflation is somewhere between 5 and 7%, depending upon the source you look at.
Can we get an explanation though? Because it just doesn't compare to the others.
I don't have the detailed explanation. Do I have Mark on the call?
I believe he is.
Mark?
Yeah, I'm here.
Can you explain the OE increase?
Some of the OE increase is financial aid because, as you know, we have a growth strategy that's relying somewhat on enrollment expansion. And so we're taking some of the funding that's generated by our surplus this year and spending it in 25 on aid to get students in the door. So it's linked to a larger strategy.
Right. Thank you, Mark. So the answer is mostly increases in financial aid. I showed you earlier the sum of those increases. And so this is just one of the institution's increases in financial aid.
An increase being a shift in strategy, because obviously that's commensurate with the headcount. That's true for Eastern and Central, but Southern is adding more
That's right.
per student.
That's correct.
Okay.
The next institution is Western Connecticut State University, excuse me, which is proposing a spending plan of $126.5 million that will allow them to balance their budget. You'll see that their expenditures will increase by 6%. You'll see that they are facing, basically are flat in regards to their state appropriations. Because of the financial condition of Western Connecticut State University, we have allocated more one-time funding to help them through a difficult period. And we project not only will we balance Western's budget in 24, but this shows you that the steps that we are taking to mitigate their deficits will project the balanced budget in FY25.
We've given them reserve dollars that we haven't given anybody else, obviously, Lloyd, to help them out of the problems that they have. I don't think we should be giving them any more. I think they're gonna have to work this out as we move forward.
I hear you, Mr. Chairman. We gave them $5 million from system funds that we held back in FY '24. And we gave them $5 million for FY '25. And then the state, as a part of their mitigation effort, and $80 million, gave us, as a part of that, $6.3 million, which will balance their '25 budget.
They're getting a great deal of help, and I know they need it, but they also have to get themselves righted on this ship, so they aren't going to be a burden as we move forward. The other three right now are pretty decent shape. They're a problem along with Connecticut State, but they have got to get, they've gotten extra dollars, and I think that's about where it ends as far as I can tell. And the others, if I was one of the other institutions, universities, I wouldn't be happy.
I'm not.
May I offer some comments?
Please.
Brendan, yes, go ahead, Brendan.
It's my understanding that Western just became the first CSU to become a primarily Hispanic serving campus officially. Correct me if I'm wrong. I am very concerned about any notion that our state would yank funding from the first institution that officially earned that status. I wonder what that says about us as a state, if that's the direction we go in. In addition, their accrediting agency has put up a number of red flags about whether they will maintain accrediting going into the near future. And so I would like to say that we should commit ourselves to supporting the first primarily Hispanic serving state university in Connecticut.
Appreciate that comment, Brendan, but they weren't, and it wasn't before. This has nothing to do with them being a Hispanic university. This has to do with taking care of business on the campus. That's all I care about right now. And they have gotten a great deal of help, and I think they deserve it to a point. I think now they have to help. And chatting with the president this morning, I know he's working hard in that direction to make it happen. But I just wanted to mention the point that $10 million that we've given them out of reserves is unusual, okay?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way this is presented kind of obscures that, which I think we need to call into sharper relief, right? Because the board needs to know this as a whole when it comes time to review this, right? Which is that balanced budget is not balanced on their own, it's balanced on the back of extraordinary aid. And, so I made this comment in an email to this committee, which is to saying this is a bit of a backwards process for me, and it's my first rodeo, and for Regent Guay over here. But normally at these kinds of levels, when I see this kind of budgeting process, we start from where the institution is at, where it wants to go, and then the budget falls from that. We're now seeing the budget and trying to infer where it wants to go. That doesn't make much sense to me, right? It is clear that President Singh has his work cut out for him. We've already known that. I've been supporting him as well and speaking with him often. That's still not clear in his budget what the plan is, right? And so again, how can I approve that without knowing the plan that's going to get us, as Chair Balducci just said, into a financially stable state, which, as Brendan says, is what we want, right? Like, we need to get to a point where they can keep NETG accreditation or not. Right? But either we fund it accordingly so that we can get it, and this is a doable goal, and we do it, or we don't. If we kind of just pretend that that's going to happen, I know the outcome of that, folks. Okay? And it won't be good. So let's kind of get past this. They're balanced, and be the point of, does the patient need significant care? Do we have a plan to get them back to health, or do we not? Because as far as I see right now, I don't see it. Now, again, that's not impugning you, Lloyd, the system office here, or even President Singh and his staff. It's simply that I don't see it in this process. The process is not good. So how can we get that?
Yeah.
I will say, Regent Yang, that we have sought that plan from Western Connecticut State University. The chancellor called the president a few weeks ago to demand that plan. And so we have it. We will be happy to share it with the regents.
Yeah, President Singh is.
Yeah, I see President
Yes,
Singh.
President Singh.
Yeah, thank you so much. Couple of things that I would want to highlight here. The plan that is being developed here is two-pronged. One, to make sure first and foremost that we are stable over the next 3 years. And I'll share with you a few things that will make that clear, that the stability part, first 3 years, and then actually resurging to self-sustaining long-term model. So let me go through this a little bit in as to what is going on. The strategic plan that we had focuses on three things. Economic efficiencies, as I mentioned earlier, there was a discussion going on where I can tell you that from 2019 onwards, we have gone down from 222 to 185 in our faculty. We have gone down from 156 to 105 in clerical and maintenance staff. We have gone down from 21 to 14 in our police force. So that is about a 20% decline over last 5 years. I could give a plan and paint a rosy picture, but then the further cuts are going to have an objection from NACHI, which in their letter noted that enough support for student-facing activities, especially, and courses being offered by faculty so that the graduation rates and retention rates do not suffer. So there's a limit to cutting further at this moment, but then let's go to the other part. How do we increase the revenues? I can very happily give you a few pointers as to what we have done in our strategic reorientation over the last few months. The biggest one is we are focusing on increasing enrollment through pockets that have not yet been utilized. One is graduate and international. I only had one international student for last X number of years at WestCon. So we are building that pipeline, and the board has very kindly approved an AI master's degree program. The strategy of graduates and graduate international is going to, I have 143 applications. Processes are not yet in the place. So I don't know how many of them will turn into actual I-20s and visas, but the seeds are being sown. And if not this semester, this spring or fall, there will be return to our investment in that. Second, we are gone to transfers. As we speak, compared to last year, I have 29% increase in our transfer deposits. I've gone for domestic undergraduate and graduate recruitment. First-time students, as we speak, this year, fall 24, are 25.7% up, which is 845 compared to 672 compared to last year. And then if you look at housing deposits, they're up 40% for the incoming class. That is about 135, 140 students in living in our housing. And then at the same time, not only just the incoming class is about 25% higher in deposit, but the overall, if you combine the incoming and overall 4-year, I'm up as we speak, total headcounts of about 5.2% and credits offered at about 8.4%. My retention data suggests that we are up compared to last year, year over year, first year retention from 70% to 73.9%. So these are the numbers that say that, yes, there is a stability and a little rebound that you can see in 9 months. My faculty colleagues and staff colleagues are actually working overtime, literally and figuratively, in designing, for example, MBA cybersecurity concentration was Master in AI in accelerated nursing program. So we are really focusing cuts at this moment. Since NACHI is going to be visiting us in December 25, I need to maintain a ratio, for example, of full-time to part-time faculty. So as we heard from different stakeholders during my strategic planning exercise at my campus, it is a tough situation, but I have a strategic plan that will certainly, I have the draft today, it will be unveiled in end of June or first week of July, and I'll be sharing that with you all, which steps, details the steps concretely laid out as to what's the long-term strategic plan. There is a study sponsored by and collaboratively with Chancellor's Office about bringing NVCC, Naugatuck Valley College, onto our campus to save more resources in a collaborative manner. Then we are also having some analysis done, and Keith Epstein, Lloyd, and a consultant firm will be actually analyzing what are the options and challenges in thinking about economies of scale and scope if we, in long term, are able to combine the two campuses. This is a very challenging situation given our two campuses. 14 police officers, for example, manage the two campuses. We are, and on record, the leanest as we speak among our 4 institutions in terms of human resources. So long term, I see program innovation, rationalization of what we offer, how we offer, recruitment strategies to build. Financial aid, by the way, the expenditure that we are showing here going up for us in Dr. Blanchard's presentation, 1.5 or 1.6 million is going for just raising the financial aid to our students. So we are building for retention. We have a new first-year experience model where the retention is already being impacted, as you saw in the data. Finally, we have the new advising model, and the visits by incoming students to that new advising model employees has gone up by 79%. And the results are there. So it's a multi-pronged, and I'm very happy to come down to a separate meeting and present for an hour or so exactly where different pieces are aligned. Sufficient to, at this moment, conclude my request to you all is that kindly look at the data that I shared. I'm happy to send a slide on that, and support us to the extent it does take time to make sure that pieces are being put in place. And there are limits, as Nachi said, as contracts and unions, and then there is tenured faculty. It is not just a corporate decision. It has to be really very meticulously, and it's a scalpel rather than going and breaking a few financial barriers. But your support has been paramount. Advice from Chancellor's Office and Dr. Blanchard, and my 2 mentor presidents, Nunez and President Toro. I think I can guarantee you that the foundations being laid now have started to show in the data. I have new provost, and I also have a new CFO coming in. Then I have new advancement VP. So the organizational changes that are commensurate with the new vision and strategic plan are being in place. Biggest one is that I am collaborating with other institutions, including Southern, for some joint programs we already have had in the past, and with Charter Oak as we speak for the future.
Well, I think that's great, and then I'm looking forward, and I think the rest of the committee and the board are waiting to see that, because I think that's important. We're going to move along, but I appreciate those comments, because it sounds like you really are working hard to make this work. And I said to you this morning, I don't envy you with the 2 campuses and the issues that go along with that. But with that comment, with that being said, did you have to want to make a comment before we have Lloyd move along?
Very quickly, thank you, Chair Balducci. President, I just promoted you, Brendan. To Professor Cunningham's point, we're here to help Western, right? We are doing everything we can to help Western, and that speaks to the financial assistance that they have received in FY24 and FY25. But to the broader point, that is not sustainable, and that cannot be counted on in perpetuity. That has been made very clear by our accrediting body, as well as between the system office and the institution in its conversation. And ultimately, we have to look at bare bones agnostic data that tells us that more change must happen. We're working very closely with Western on that. And so ultimately, I just want to reassure the board and the viewing public that this is front and center when it comes to my administration, working very closely with Western to try to do everything we can to get Western onto the path to serve the students and to treat the faculty and staff the way they deserve. Thank you, Chair Lovici.
Thank you. Lloyd, any other comments about Western before we move on? Anybody?
More so. I think that was all that was said that needed to be said. Thank you. Next institution on deck here, excuse me, is Connecticut State Community College, which proposes a spending plan of $420 million, which will show a very small deficit of about $2.2 million. But I mentioned earlier that that will be overcome by their allocation from the RSA. So they will balance their budget. Now, that $420 million plan is $40 million greater than the FY24 estimate. That $40 million I mentioned earlier comprises, the increased costs that come our way, regardless of any decision we make. So of that $40 million, 14.1 is the CBAC, 4.1 is inflation, $8.4 million, I showed this on a slide earlier, is the fringe cost that CBAC has to take, that CT State has to take on. And then there's $8 million of personnel costs that were paid for by a grant previously, and that grant has expired, and many of those personnel will be absorbed into the CT State budget. So by my calculation, that represents $8 million. By my calculation, that represents $34.6 million of that $40 million increase. So it's a very small amount that's left over for whatever decisions President Meduco has to make. But President Meduco is here today to the extent that you have specific questions about CT State's plan and their budget.
Before you go further, yes, just a comment, that $40 million, what you seem to say is that the majority of it, Lloyd, is uncontrollable. It's the contract, CBAC contract, and the fringe benefits that he, meaning President Meduco, has no control over. It's the other dollars that we'd be looking at, which as I look at it now in our discussion yesterday, is not as significant as I thought when I saw $40 million.
But correct me if I'm wrong,
That's correct.
There are personnel hires that previously have been frozen or not hired that are intended to be hired. So this is not purely CBAC and fringe.
No, I agree.
Okay.
But it's the big chunk.
Sure.
It's the majority chunk. And what you left out, Mr. Chairman, was about $4 million of inflation on their OE expenditures.
You're right.
Sure. Yeah, can we get some more color? I see President Meduco right there.
President Meduco?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Chair, Regents, Chancellor Chang, and esteemed colleagues, and my CFO, Carrie Keller, is also on the call too. So, in terms of that 40 million, Dr. Blanchard is spot on in terms of CBAC that we can't control, in terms of the inflation to the tune of 4.1 million, in the tune of 8.4 million for fringe, and then there's 8 million, and 8 million that Lord referred to in terms of the expiring grants, specifically for our guided pathways advisors. So that initiative that was launched a couple of years ago was entirely funded by soft dollars, some ARPA and some other grant funds, and those dollars have expanded or expired, and now CT State is responsible for absorbing that cost, and those are real concrete examples of many of the pressures we're feeling on our budget. If you remove the $40 million and you simply look at the efforts that CT State made in terms of deficit mitigation to close our $33.6 million deficit for FY24, we surpassed it, right? And we surpassed it. And I respect Regent Yang. CT State didn't freeze any positions or eliminate those positions. We simply had 140 positions that through natural attrition, but also through an arduous hiring process, it takes us a while, on average, anywhere from 6 to 8 months to hire a full-time position. So just that, that reality for us results in circumstantial savings. That let's say a position is budgeted for $80,000 plus fringe for an academic year, and it takes us 6 months to hire that position. As a result, we're going to save about $40,000 plus the percent of fringe. You multiply that by the number of positions that we have across our 22 locations, right, serving the 70,000 students, and we have about 6,200 plus employees, right? That's actually a small number compared to the number of people we're responsible for. So there's a lot of layered nuance that's both current, but also things that are legacy that we're inheriting and that we're doing our best to not right size, but be responsible in terms of mitigating and making sure that we're not harming ourselves any further. I will also mention too, CT State, we have initial accreditation by NETCHI. And the one thing NETCHI has been very clear with us is what are our plans to hire or maintain a certain staffing and faculty level to ensure that we can commit to not only their 9 standards, but ultimately to our mission and the students that we serve, right? So we have, Regent Yang, you made this point earlier in terms of just these external pressures, right? We are wedged between our accreditation that we have initial status, and we won't receive full accreditation status until the spring of 2028. We have the legislature, right? We have the executive branch. We have K-12. We serve more high schools than anyone else in the state of Connecticut. We have manufacturing that will never break even from a cost perspective, right? We have nursing. And then ultimately, we have the students and employees that we're responsible to. And I think we've done a committed effort this year to be responsible in terms of our deficit, despite the things that we can't control, but also the expectations that are placed on CT State to be all things to everyone. That I'm not saying is sustainable, but is the reality, of our institution.
Yeah.
You also have $5.7 million for pathways, John.
Yeah.
PACT,
Yeah.
Yeah, the PACT expansion was unfunded this year. So again, there and again, we fully are appreciative of PACT expansion, and kudos to Governor Lamont and the General Assembly. We're forever grateful for their support of free tuition programs for our students, but nonetheless, that was unfunded. So again, additional costs that we have to account for going into the FY25 budget.
Absolutely, but my question is this. If I recall, about 2 years ago, we added advisors to help students at the community college. Okay, you weren't there at the time, but we did. And what their job was to try and get students to take more classes and in the direction that they thought they could be. Part of it I not totally agree with, because it seems like their jobs were dependent on what they did with the students as far as getting them into classes and classworks. But I thought it was a 2-year, we got funding for 2 years. It was a grant, I believe, or am I wrong in that these advisors would be there to help with PACT, et cetera.
Yeah. So in terms of the funding, and Carrie, if you're on, if you can put your camera on and unmute yourself, we can kind of unpack just what the evolution of the funding for those GPAs and ultimately the cost that we're now absorbing.
Okay, so now we have 2 years, people there that were hired for up to 2 years by the grant. So what I understand then is at the end of the 2 years, that they're gone. Is that correct?
No, those were permanent hires, and they are bargain employees that are afforded the rights of their union, right? And again, that feeds into the complexity of of our existence in terms of to hire that degree of personnel. And again, our GPAs are phenomenal at what they're doing, and they've along with all of our employees have contributed to us achieving flat enrollment compared to the death spiral that we're facing year over year. But at the end of the day, You know, when you fund something to that degree with soft money and the soft money dries up, right now you have that ongoing responsibility for, you know, for permanent expenditures. And that's just the challenges that we're facing, not only trying to unpack, but really trying to do right by our institution, but also really try to unpack a very complicated mosaic of a budget. And Carrie, if you're wrong, can you just chime in on the GPAs just to kind of give the, you know, give the audience an idea of just what that has meant for us?
Yes, hi, good afternoon. My name is Carrie Kelly. I'm the Vice President of Finance Administration, Chief Financial Officer for Connecticut State Community College. Chair Balducci, you're right. We initiated the program for guided pathways in FY22, and it was funded primarily from our HERF institutional dollars. It was supplemented with ARPA dollars, and we also had an additional federal grant for my repo. So those dollars sustained us through 22 and 23. So in a sense, they were off budget. They would not have been reflected here in the spending plan because they are grant funded. At the high water mark, we had 191 guided pathways and advisors and campus administrative leads. We've had some attrition in the program, and the program was originally built with our aspirational enrollments in mind. As attrition has occurred, we have not been refilling those roles. In the current fiscal year, the federal funds began to expire, and we had to pick up $8 million of, we have expiring federal funds we have to pick up next year of $8 million for guided pathways advisors. That's one of the significant and contributing factors of why you see our increase so much over FY24 to FY25, because we have to pick up those dollars that are expiring. We are now down to 154 guided pathways advisors. We're still able to maintain the 250 to 1 advisor to ratio that we had talked about and as per the board resolution.
Okay, so briefly then, and briefly, because we've been here a long time, I know everybody's probably tired. I know I'm getting that way. Briefly, are they successful, and is your rate of students coming in going up or what? Because that's what the job is, from what I understand, those advisors, is to, one, bring them in, two, guide them through courses that'll help them get a certificate or get a degree, associate's degree. So I would just like briefly to give me back a response to that. I would appreciate it.
You know, I'll speak to that. And I've been honest publicly. I wouldn't have doubled down and said that these GPAs are going to pay for themselves to that degree. Just in my experience for community colleges, you don't invest in terms of expanding employees. You first look at your curriculum and other things. And I think it was an overshoot because the cost of personnel and fringe and everything that's out of control will always outpace enrollment. Our GPAs are doing a phenomenal job, and we've seen tremendous work. That's why our enrollment has stabilized year over year. But to think that it's going to lead to an 8 to 10 to double digit gains in students, which was originally proposed, that simply was an error and a mistake. And that's something that we now have to pay for in our budget. I can't speak to the calculus that went into the proposals of GPAs from a couple of years ago, but just it's something I've never seen in higher ed to go to that degree and not have like a pilot phased approach where maybe you're increasing advisors by 10 a year, 10 to 20 a year to see if there's a quote unquote benefit in terms of retention and enrollment. We went all in, and this is a result.
Okay, and it's just a concern because I wanted to see whether or not that was right. I'm going on your word and that it is, and that it's doing a positive. You know, we spend money in positive ways. I have no problem. It's when we got money we're spending out there and it is in positive ways that bothers me the most. So I appreciate that, John.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Any other comments about CT State that we have?
I want to make a comment about, and this may be a little too much on that topic, but the unethical nature of the design of the college as it concerned this GPA issue, right? It required that, or assumed that GPAs would induce students to take at least one more credit, which would then pay for their own salaries. Luckily, we've hired wonderful people who care deeply about students who would never do such a thing. And it may turn out that the needs of our students who are non-traditional students would never be that. But it just tells you what the challenges of a college that was designed well before Dr. Maduka came here, well before many of you were in these positions, the challenge that we face with the structural issues of the presumption, the assumptions that underlie this college, and that we continue to wrestle with those challenges. So there's going to be a lot that we're going to have to spend just to correct, to fix, to restructure, and to sustain. It was a very expensive mistake we made.
Thank you for that. And that goes to my comment of BOR about justifying your wages by getting students to take more courses or whatever, but appreciate that. Any other comments? Lloyd, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me offer my comments with regard to CT State. I want to congratulate the leadership at CT State for the extraordinary mitigation effort they undertook. They faced the largest challenge, if you recall, during the mitigation effort as any of our institutions across our system. And they came through by outperforming the mitigation plan. If you look at the FY24 budget expenditure of $425 million, they reduced it by $45 million to $380. So the increase is really partly artificial based on the low base from the FY24 estimate. Their efforts have been extraordinary, and I think President Maduka should be congratulated, and I think his work is still yet to come, but I think the students who are most in need are the students that CT State serves. So my final institution, Mr. Chairman, is Charter Oak State College. Their spending plan is $22 million, and they do project a balanced budget. You'll see on the slide, basically they support themselves with small amounts of support from the state, $3.2 million in FY25. And if you saw their enrollment numbers, they are consistently rising. So we believe that Charter Oak is doing what we have asked them to do. And finally, Mr. Chairman and Regents, I want to show you the changes made at the system office and shared services. Mr. Chairman, you asked me to make sure that the folks at system office did the same thing that we asked the folks at the institutions to do, which is cut our costs. You'll see on this slide, and this is the dollars associated with the 30 persons that we reduced. And Professor Sasanker, of those 30 persons, I'm told that 25 were managers. But the savings that we implemented in FY24 created $6 million in personnel savings. You'll see it's 4 in salaries, 2 in fringe, and then $6 million in OE. That 7 is just a rounding error, but we are proud to share with you that we did save $12 million. We've reduced $12 million in costs at the system office and shared services organization alone. And finally, for those who believe we ought to dip into our reserves, I want to show you what the condition of our reserves is at the end of FY23. So this first line is the UNP for FY23 as per financial statements. And it shows that Central has $90 million, Eastern has 43, Southern has 49, Western has 11. That's 11 that was built up while we provided them with $10 million in support. That's in preparation for FY26. CT State has 154 and Charter Oak has $8 million. Now, some of that money cannot be used based on policy, BOR policy. That's the next line. That's the designated amount. Those amounts are designated for specific purposes, whether for covenant requirements for debt service or for self-supporting programs or for operational plans for buildings that are about to come online or programs that are about to come online. So the total available reserves for operations is the UNP minus the designated amount, which totals 27 million for Central, 6 million for Eastern, 2 million for Southern, just under $1 million for Western, and 123 for CT State, and 3 million for Charter Oak. The last line shows what is the appropriate amount of reserves that we should be holding. Every organization, every business, every nonprofit, every college and university has to maintain reserves when they operate an organization that spends hundreds of millions of dollars. An appropriate amount of reserves, according to industry standard, is 40%. So when we look at our primary reserve ratio, Central is just below that benchmark. Eastern is even further below that benchmark, but at healthy levels. Southern is even further below that benchmark, but half the appropriate level. Western, as I said before, is well below that benchmark. CT State is a fair amount below that benchmark. CT State's numbers look large, but that's because it's a large organization that spends about $500 million a year. So it is only Charter Oak that is at and slightly above industry benchmark for an appropriate amount of reserves. So, Mr. Chairman, we try to manage our institutions consistent with best practices. This slide shows that as it relates to cash reserves, we are trying to engage in best practices, but we recognize that the public doesn't want to see funds sitting fallow in our reserve accounts. So we do strike a balance between what is appropriate from an industry best practice standpoint and be mindful of the fact that we're not just sitting on dollars to sit on dollars. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation in proposing the FY spending plan to the Board of Regents. Thank you for your time. More questions, I'm happy to answer.
Just a quick question. What are the reserves for the central office? Not Central Connecticut, the system office.
For system office, we have a few reserves, $13.5 million I mentioned that we held back from FY24. That's for the retirement incentive. Melantina, if you're on the call, I might be missing other reserves that are designated for debt service and other purposes.
The state universities have
No, Melantina, he's
reserves.
asking about system office.
System office, yes, it's within the CSU system. And the CCC shared services system office is within the Connecticut state. So there are no separate reserves for the CCC system office shared services. And the system office that rolls up with the universities, most of the reserves are for paying the debt service payments that are combined and processed here at the system office.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I hope that answered your question.
I appreciate that. I didn't see it on here. I thought it should be. I think maybe I'm the only one interested, but I think other members also wanted to know. I appreciate that. Questions we're gonna have, I know we've got one member who had to take a call. Open it up for discussion by members of the committee. Either that or we can go to a vote on this thing. And what we're looking to do, and what I would like to do, I think we made a lot of progress. I think some of the questions were really good. I think the direction we're heading in is positive. I think the idea of being able to attack this again rather than having to wait a year for me, and I think also for you, Ted, and I'm pretty sure Marty's feels the same way, is that we can open if we have to and either yank money out or somehow move money around and put money back in wherever we can do it. With that, I'll entertain any other comments or questions before we vote.
Well, I just want to make a comment about absolutely, Rich, I think that will make a difference to me, being able to have that. I think that, so we're not approving this actual resolution. I see there's a resolution in here, right? Because that's approved by the full board. I think that what needs to happen here, and I just want to be clear, like what is important to me is that we have given this enough thought. And again, I don't think we've given enough time. I understand why to some extent, but I still think we can improve this process significantly in terms of stakeholders. And that's speaking as a region. I don't even know, Kalina and Brendan, if you guys have had enough, because if I haven't, I didn't, sure, shit, no, you didn't. And that's not cool, right? So we need to make this process better. So that's a given. But forget about that. We are where we are. The important part to me is that we, going forward, are able to have enough controls on this. So I think that in this resolution that the full board would consider, we explicitly
This
build.
is a resolution, by the way.
Oh, this is a resolution? Then I want this revised before we go bring this to a vote. Because I would like that resolved to add resolution there that explicitly builds in timelines for us to review this, like explicit time to reopen this, whatever that is, 3 months, whatever it is, or whatever the enrollment report is due, perhaps is a good time, whatever that might be. And that's one thing. And the other thing, that we pace any hiring that is unlocked because of this budget, because hiring, if it, you hire 5 administrators, we just discovered, right? Now they're on the books. So that has the capability to just basically make it so that our controls are meaningless, right? That if we want to rein that spending back in, because as just happened with the guided pathways people, we just got, sorry, they're here, and now they're on the books and they're bargained, right? So I would want into that resolution, Rich, that we have an explicit timeline of when we were going to review this, and that we pace any hiring that is unlocked because of this.
Well, we can amend this, okay, because I'd like to move this thing, because we haven't got a lot of time. We can amend it, and I'm trying to think about how we can do this. It probably has to be quarterly, we should look at it. You can't do it monthly, that's.
Nah, it's
I
outrageous.
mean, that doesn't even
But
make
maybe
sense.
when
I think my instinct tells me is that we may want to set forth something, but I think the chancellor, the CFO, they may have, the university presidents, they may have really good clarity as when those should be. So if we set forth an expectation that we want to plan in the next 45 days on that, something like that may be better coming from them instead of us creating it. Because
yeah, so
we don't know when the information's ready. We don't know how to develop the run rates, right?
You're not gonna see anything until mid-September. I mean, Zoma just mentioned that. She won't have her numbers until mid-September. And I'll bet more likely in the past, it's been late September when we start to get it. So we really can't jump on it, but I understand, because I agree, and it was one of the thoughts we had, is let's take a look. Hey, it's nickels and dimes, let it go. Or wait a minute, we've got an issue here that came up.
we
didn't.
significantly undershot where we thought we'd be, or
Right.
we've overshot maybe.
Right.
Or, the same thing goes with, as we hear more about the funding picture from the state. And again, I want to be very clear about the other side of the house, which is the expenditure side of the house, and specifically hiring, because that's where we lose control, right? If we just unlock this and it's like go time, and God forbid 100 hires get made, or 200, how many hires just got made, then we can't pull back the strings on that. It's done.
Okay, I'm trying to think how we do that.
Process wise this, yeah, because that needs to be built into the resolution.
If I may offer, Regent Yang, I think if we're looking to do, if the committee is looking to do an amendment to this current proposed resolution that provides a level of kind of structure, timeline, and accountability, the board may charge the chancellor to establish that, and then to present that to the board in a finite period of time. So, whether that is in a special meeting later this summer or the first meeting of the fall or what have you, we can.
Maybe it's a deliverable also, one deliverable at a
Correct.
time.
Yeah, that would include both, the timeline and how to keep the controls,
Right.
however the parceling the monies or the hires or whatever that is.
Thus the wants and needs of the committee are established and the charges received by the
And I would
administration.
say that's for the board meeting, but the chair could call a special meeting in the summer where we could agree what's the progress or what's it look like so far.
Let's not go crazy.
Well, no, I understand where you're coming from. But first of all, there isn't going to be a lot coming down in the summer. I don't mean that as a negative, but there's not a lot. It goes back to the presidents of the universities, and they'll tell you. So I think we've got to look at, our fiscal year begins
July 1,
July 1. July, August, September.
September sometime.
So you look at the end of September, okay? We make it that. Then you got October, November, December. And by then, by the way, we ought to start getting a look at what's going on for the next fiscal year.
Yes.
And then you got January, February, March, et cetera.
And this also gives us time to dig into some of the questions that we raised today without having to hold the whole thing up.
Okay.
I would simply recommend that it is very reasonable to ask the chancellor and the chancellor's administration and to work with the institutional leaders to create the timeline that would allow us to provide detail and reporting, and we can establish
And controls.
and controls, and establish that over the summer so that it can be presented clearly and publicly in the early fall, and then enacted in the early fall and beyond.
I'm fine with that.
Can I add two considerations that are unique to this year? One is I understand that the RSA funds it's 14 million is not a lot of money, but it is, it's a consideration, right? And it changes the spending plan.
That's real.
So this year, you had said that you need input from faculty, staff,
Sure.
et cetera. So that we build in some sort of process by which that'll actually happen so that we can have the conversation productively with the board. The other thing is that the 20 million that should be coming, I know that there was a will to use that for some sort of tuition relief for
Correct.
students.
Yes.
So if we could address that, but also I wonder if just sort of publicly discuss the reasons that we might or might not want to dip into reserves and then reimburse ourselves later so that we can give it right to the students up front now, as opposed to doing some sort of, maneuvering down the line.
I would like to do that, but I'm not sure we can, Kalina, and believe me, I would like to do that today, but I'm not sure we can do that. I like the idea, but I think we're going to have to wait on that.
Is it a lack of certainty about the 20 million?
Yes.
Yeah, it's beyond the certainty.
I've got a little familiarity with that place, and my gut is that if there's $1.50 left at the end, we may be happy. I'm serious. I think there's a good possibility that much of that money will disappear. And I'd like to find some to end up doing what we're talking about with the students, but that's where it is right now. But I appreciate
The
that.
point is well taken, and I think we
Yes.
do need to have, maybe in our next, whatever is on the agenda for our next FinCom meeting, we add in a discussion about what we want to do about future tuition raises, because none of us here, you, me, or Marty, want them.
Right, well, I know, yeah.
So let's talk about how we make that
I
happen.
just want to make one point about this information cadence rhythm, what we're going to call it. This should not be something that works for the board. It should work for the faculty. We should be able to see, you should be able to see this information. The system sees the information. I'm talking at a high level, right? And so that we can all agree on the status of where we're at. We all can
Yes.
agree. And if somebody's in trouble, let's call the fire department or,
Absolutely, absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so my question then is, we have a resolution before us, which does this with the resolves. Question, do we need to amend it?
I think we do need to amend it. Pam?
Okay,
Yes, we do. Let me make a suggested draft addition to the resolution that you're considering right now. Let it be resolved that the Finance and Infrastructure Committee charge or the Board of Regents charge the Chancellor to deliver to the board via the Finance and Infrastructure Committee timelines and accountability to provide details for the support and reporting on the status of the fiscal year 25 spending plans no later than August 30th, 2024. And that I suggest that as just a method to provide the guardrails and the timelines to actually, so that would be my.
I think that's good, except for one thing, and I think Ted will agree. On a quarterly basis, I think we ought to have take a look at, and whether we do anything or not. Fine.
Marty's point well taken, like we should time it according to the institution, but rough.
Correct, which is why I left it broad that the Chancellor will deliver the timelines and accountability to provide details too. So that will give him an opportunity to work with the institutions to find the proper timing for these reports to come out.
The suggested schedule to be approved by the committee, and
Right.
the committee.
Then says yes.
Correct.
You okay with that?
Fine.
I can draft up the appropriate language and make sure that
Okay with that language? Okay. You've got that down. We agree with your comments. And unless you put something tricky in there that we didn't agree on.
Mr. Chairman,
That sounds great, Pamela. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Wait a minute, Lloyd, you want to make a comment?
real quick, just a point of order, so to speak. The first quarter would be the end of September, not the end of August.
Oh, but she's talking about coming up with a plan.
Okay, I thought
Coming
we were
with-
doing it quarterly. Fair enough.
That's a quarterly, that would make it quarterly. Good.
If we have the plan in place, then when the numbers and census are ready, we'll be able to implement it. I don't necessarily, my suggestion for August 30th is that, so we're not chasing
No,
data.
that's fine. August 30th is fine.
Okay, so two things. We need to do a vote on the amendment and then vote on the proposed resolution, the amended resolution. If we
amended.
could, Chairman Balducci?
That's correct. So we have the amendment you've explained, which is good. I think the members here agree. So I would make a motion that we adopt the amendment. I move to adopt the
Resolution as amended.
as
No,
amendment.
not yet,
Yeah,
please.
no,
Let's,
the amendment first.
Oh, let's amend it, yes.
Yeah,
Right.
so
Amend.
we move to amend the resolution. Is there a second? Second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye opposed, the ayes have it. Okay, now we're talking about an amended resolution and we'll be bringing before the entire board next week. Any other comments by members?
It's not next week, right? It's the week after.
June 27th.
The week after.
I've been here, we've been here a week already.
It's the week after, and we don't need to put this in the amendment, in this official thing, but I don't want to lose track of some of these other items that got brought up by some of the colleagues around here that we need to follow up on, but that's just for reporting for the regular.
Yep, no,
board. This doesn't need to go on the resolution right now.
that's in the minutes and we'll follow.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're looking for a motion to adopt the resolution
As amended.
as amended.
Fine, so moved.
So moved, second.
Second.
Motion made in second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye opposed, the ayes have it. Thank you very much.
Move to
That was,
get the hell out.
Any other business come before the committee? Hearing none. Move that we adjourn today's finance committee. Thank everybody for being here. Thank everybody for your input. We'll be talking about this again, I know, at the full board meeting. Thank you.
You run a meeting or two in your life.
Your lives, ladies and gentlemen, your live stream is stopped.
Alex.